Go for it.
Cool. Okay, so I guess this is the first episode of our what did we call it? The self-help podcast or something like that. Yeah, and we're doing the book Attached by, I'm gonna mess up their names definitely. I didn't even try to practice their names at all, but Amir Levine and Rachel Haller, I think. Yeah, so, and then the subtitle of the book is The New Science of Adult Attachment and How It Can Help You Find and Keep Love. Cool. Are you ready, Peter?
I'm ready.
Okay, so I don't know if you want to start with your summary.
Go for it, then I'll go with mine afterwards.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, very rough, but we'll see how it goes. So attachment or attached is about mainly understanding the three different attachment styles. There's anxious, avoidant, and secure. And then with anxious people, they usually are anxious about the state of the relationship. Then for avoidant people, they usually avoidant, or they have avoiding tendencies in the relationship when things get too close. And then for secure people, those are the ones who are normally stably committed, and they seek the well-being of the other. And then the book covers a number of real-world cases, examples, studies, and it explores how people act when attached to a partner, specifically in the context of a romantic relationship. And then it also tries to help you understand attachment style, so as well as your own attachment style, as well as the attachment styles of others, with a note that it's often based, what do I say here? With the note that often based on our attachment style, we act in remarkably predetermined ways. And then it also tries to help one understand the constructive and destructive patterns that play out in the various attachment styles, as well as those how those attachment styles interact. So, yeah, that's the overall
Gist of
summary,
it.
I think. Do you want to...
Yeah, no, I can add on to that. So, with, as you mentioned, it covers three attachment styles, anxious, avoidant, and secure. I think just to highlight something, it's just the different strategies which the avoidant and the anxious attachment styles kind of gravitate around, how the anxious people are have more activating strategies, which in turn try to seek closeness from their partners, because as anxious people they try to feel close to their partners. Yet with avoidant people, they have deactivating strategies which they kind of execute, and by so doing, they try to push their partners away. For secure people, they're the boring, I would say, and more stable people, about that. But yeah, so I think that's very important to kind of, when identifying, also to kind of dig deep and actually understand what your partners or whoever it is you're trying to understand their attachments or what they activate, deactivating strategies are, because then in turn, if you're, because later in the book, they kind of try to guide you in sort of mitigating the opposing factors. That's if one finds himself in an avoidant and anxious relationship. So the different tools there's a tool that they use in order for you actually need to find like a secure source or someone you think is secure in your life, and actually use them to walk through a certain situation, from a perspective of a secure person, if you're avoidant or anxious. So yeah, just to carry on with the summary, like you've said, it's the book explores relationships and the different attachment styles, and also to tell you that you're not doomed if you find yourself in certain type of relationships. And also, I think one important factor that I read was, as much as they're trying to get to a point where people that find themselves in an anxious and avoidant relationship get to that secure point. There was an important point that said there's just some relationships that are irreconcilable. You know, they get to a point where you can't really, you have to draw that line and say, you know, this is it. You know, so I found that to be, you know, a high point that, you know, they're able to say, you know, not everything needs to be fixed. You know, so yeah, in a nutshell, that's somewhat of my summary in addition to what you said about the book.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like you said, that's a high point, and I think it is in some sense. And for me, it was different. It was almost like a low point because it's like, oh, you know, I have this tendency that all relationships can be salvaged if you just work hard enough. And I think just accepting that isn't actually always the case. Sometimes people really do struggle to change for very fundamental reasons. But I mean, as you also mentioned, and this is maybe a high point for me, is that for the majority of people, they can actually change. And also a lot of people are secure, which is also really great. So yeah, I think taking those kind of things into account and not sort of being like, oh, I can't change, I'm stuck in this attachment style, is a very helpful thing to realize.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Do you have some key takeaways?
Yeah, the key takeaways.
Cool. Should we kick off with one of yours, one of mine?
Okay.
We just go like that.
Yeah, so one of mine, I think the one that I had at the top of the list, you know, early in the book that said, even though attachment styles are impossible to change, they can fundamentally be changed. And later in the book it says attachment styles are actually like plastic. You know, so I think that was actually some good insight to kind of say, if let's say you get to a point where you realize that you're avoidant or anxious, you not actually feel doomed. You know, you can actually, you know, work on it to actually find yourself in a better position or place, you know, in terms of your attachment style. You know, maybe there are ways in which being avoidant and anxious actually works out to your advantage, but yeah, I think one should strive to have a secure attachment. So I think just for
definitely.
your well-being, you know, and just for the relation itself. So just knowing that, you know, it just requires a little bit of work, and actually I think just like many things, you know, coming to that realization that, you know, I need to change and I need to act on it, you know, was kind of comforting, that, you know, people shouldn't actually feel doomed, you know, if they look back and be like, oh, you know, I've been a mess, you know, I've been through several relationships, and fundamentally every time, you know, the reason that this relationship didn't work was because of my attachment style, you know. But if you then get to that point and understand that, you can then, I think, work towards changing that and becoming more secure. So I think that was one of my biggest takeaway from it. You know?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great takeaway. Like we were saying earlier, it's just great to know that you can actually change it. And it's also helpful to realize that the books like this give you information about understanding yourself better and understanding those relationships that you have. And then from that you can learn, oh, okay, these are the ways that I have destructive patterns, and these are the things that I do well. How can I over time learn to be more secure in the destructive patterns that I have? And yeah, I think it's a very helpful thing. Cool. So going on to my first takeaway, I think it's a fairly obvious takeaway, but I think it's helpful to just re-go through them, which is the actual attachment styles, that there are those 3 different attachment styles: anxious, avoidant, and secure. And I actually think it's a really helpful way of classifying attachment styles. Obviously, you can get too lost in being like, this person is this or that, but I think it's an extremely helpful way of thinking about those attachment styles, those relationships between people, and why things play out the way that they play out. I think in the book they say something along the lines of that we end up acting out in extremely predetermined ways often, which I think can, for some people, be quite surprising, because they think, no, I'm very much in control of what I want, and I know the way that I'm thinking about things. But meantime, if you sort of, especially over the course of years, if you look at the way that relationships play out, then people often fall into very similar similar cycles to their past relationships and things like that. And this book, I think, helps one to realize what that kind of cycle is and why one acts in those ways. Obviously, it can't get to all of the core roots of why, but I think it's a very helpful thing.
I think just to add that, as anything in life, I think the fundamentals remain the same. The situation might be different, but the root cause, the fundamental, whatever it is you're going through, or whatever way you react to things, there's always a similar root cause. And I think this book addresses that, rather than, giving you a guide map to how to react in certain situations. So I don't think it necessarily has to address every single situation, but it can just equip you with, you identifying what are the root causes and the fundamentals of why you act a certain way. Like you say, like we act in a predetermined way. And I think we've had this conversation in the past. Isn't that also how our brain works? We think we're making cautious decisions, but it's actually based on the different scenarios that have gone through our brains that, we actually decisions are being, or outcomes are being made to the input that we actually get. So I believe everything that we do is based on a certain calculation. No, it has been predetermined. It's just that we haven't faced that thing yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a massive combination of like factors at play. Even in the book, I think they touch on the fact that people have tried to trace the attachment styles down to like some specific thing. Like one of the people was saying, they believe that it comes down to how you were raised.
Upbringing, yeah.
But then other people know it's genetics, and the reality seems to be that it's actually all of these different factors. So it's not just upbringing and genetics, but also general life experience, past relationships, all kinds of things come into play. And I think they also mention in the book that sometimes it's when you are in a very dramatic life situation. It could be the death of someone. It could be a relationship difficulty. It could be many different things. But those are often the cases when fundamental shifts in the attachment styles take place as well. So you might shift from maybe you're quite secure and then you become anxious, or vice versa, because of those fundamental shifts. So I think, there's lots of things at play. And I think it's also helpful to realize that and not try and pin it down onto one specific thing. But but looking at those different attachment styles, so you touched on it a bit, so I think it's helpful just to go over them in a little bit more detail. So the anxious style being people that get easily worried about the state of their relationship, and they usually feel a very deep need to be close to their partners, and it's a constant thing that they feel, and they generally have a very sensitive attachment system, which I also found quite interesting. It makes sense because they are very attuned to the relationship and the things happening in the relationship. So if there are relationship difficulties, then they'll pick those up very quickly. But on the sort of con side of things, they often will over-excite their attachment system and project things that aren't real and things like that because of of their overly sensitive attachment system, which I think is quite a thing to be aware of if you are an anxious person.
I think just to add on to that, I think that was an interesting section that I was reading it, to say that anxious people are very aware when things change. I mean, there was a whole watching a video of someone's mood transitioning, from being happy to sad, and they were the first people in that study to pick up when that transition, but like you've also said, the problem is overly fantasize as to what might be the issue. They do not let the person themselves actually, how can I say, they speak out on what's actually going on. They jump to conclusion to what might be the case, and I don't think that's very helpful. I think it's very important to have a person's perspective on something than you jumping into conclusions about something, So I think maybe, that ability on its own, I think is great. I think as an anxious person, you just have to then, change that a bit to say, okay, if I'm able to pick this up, rather than me concluding to what the problem might be, actually going to that person and asking them like, oh, what's actually going on?
Yeah.
I think that can be more powerful than, the rabbit hole they end up going down,
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's definitely something that they touch on in the book, where they suggest that people that have that anxious attachment style don't, as you say, jump to conclusions. They need to delay what they're thinking before they jump to those conclusions, and get the input from their partner or outside circumstances before they make those conclusions. But I mean, at the same time, it's interesting that very quickly an anxious person can be calmed by the presence of their partner. So then on the anxious attachment style, sorry, this is probably going to be a long point because we could touch on all the different parts of it, but you mentioned the activating strategies. So I had a note here that says those are so maybe just a quick side note, because it took me a little bit of time to realize this, but the anxious style has generally activation strategies. And as you mentioned earlier, I think the avoidance style usually has deactivating strategies. And so for the anxious style, those activation strategies are the thoughts and feelings that compel them to seek closeness with their partner. And then on the deactivating side, for the avoidant people, those are any thoughts or behaviors that are used to reduce intimacy, because the avoidants are normally people that are trying to distance themselves when they get close. So I thought it would be interesting to go through a few of those activation strategies that anxious people use. So some of them are the worrying that this is the only one shot at love, that this is the soulmate and things like that.
The one.
Yeah, the one. And then another thing is constantly thinking about their partner to the point of not allowing them to be able to just do their daily things because they're so fixated on their partner. And then another one that I think is a even more dangerous one is putting the partner on a pedestal, to think that they are more perfect than they actually are. And I think that sort of goes hand in hand with the view that they often have of themselves, which they often sort of diminish themselves. I don't think that that's necessarily an activation strategy, but yeah, those are some of the activation strategies. There's also the protest behaviors. So so those are and that again is generally for the anxious style people. Protest behaviors are any action that attempts to re-establish contact with the partner and get their attention. So it's often things like excessive attempts to calling the person when they say, for example, they're working.
But just to double back, remember the protest behaviors are to get closeness. So it would be ignoring cause. So it's more of you did that, I'll do this.
Yes, yeah.
So it won't be the excessive calling. That's an activating strategy.
We'd have to check, but I think that the protest behavior is excessive. So when you are activated and you sort of worried about them not having contact with you, then in order to reestablish contact with the partner, then you make calls often. But then, like you were saying, giving the silent treatment and things like that is another protest behavior. But we can look at it, but I think they kind of couple together generally. Another one was the keeping score. So trying to you do this, I do this. So also similar to what you said, Nana. And then another one is making the partner feel jealous. And what's interesting there is that for the anxious style, the making the partner feel jealous is a very purposeful thing. Whereas with the avoidant style, the making the partner feel jealous it's less purposeful and it's more a sort of, I don't want to be around you because you've gotten too close to me. I'm rather going to spend time with this other person.
No, but it's also, remember, the avoidance actions are then misinterpreted by an anxious person. So, like you said, it's not them trying to make their partner jealous. It's just that since they want to create distance, so rather spend time with someone else than their partner, and that in turn then creates that illusion or makes an anxious partner actually feel jealous and everything. It's not a protest behavior like an anxious person would do. So it's not intended to make the partner jealous. It's just because of their deactivating strategy of trying to create space. They'll opt to do something with someone else instead of, let's say, in air quotes, the anxious partner. And then they, on their own, then run through that jealousy and whatnot. But yet, if you look at, on the flip side, with the person with an anxious attachment style, they will purposefully do things to make their partner jealous. So,
it's a strange difference in the way that they act. And then another thing is that in the book they recommend for people with an anxious attachment style that they do their best to avoid dating avoidance, generally because of the fact that avoidants tend to push one away when they get too close, where an anxious people tend to like draw in, which I think they call in the book the anxious avoidant trap, which a dangerous thing. And then going on to the avoidance styles, I think we've kind of touched on it a bit, but just sort of quickly running through it. So those are the people who obviously they actually want to be in a relationship, but they struggle to get close with their partner because they generally need space because of various different reasons, as we've mentioned, upbringing, genetics, all kinds of different things. And so when the relationship gets too close, then they generally use disengagement tactics, or what they call deactivating strategies. And those are some of them, obviously those are meant to reduce that intimacy. And some of them are saying things like, I'm not ready to commit. I'm focused on, another one is that they focus on imperfections. I think that's quite an important one for people who are avoidant to be aware of, because focusing on imperfections distances the partner and it makes them it makes you sort of think that they aren't actually suitable when they might actually be a really nice, suitable partner. And they, in the book, they say that think they give a title at some point saying "Seeing the worm instead of the apple," which I found funny because if a worm was in the apple, I still wouldn't want to eat the apple. But I get the point of what they're getting at. And then another one was pulling away when things are going well. I think that's one of the classic ones. And then another one also to be aware of is the Phantom X, I think. Because I think people often avoidant people, they'll fantasize about the X and things like that. And then they'll almost in some sense put the X on a pedestal and then compare their current partner and dampen the way that they feel about the current partner. And obviously there can be cases where the current partner is actually not as nice of a person or this or that, but generally with avoidant people, the partner actually might be just as nice or nicer than the ex, but they will reduce the way that they view that person, be unaware to themselves that that's actually a deactivating strategy, trying to create that distance. Yeah, so those are, I think, quite important. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on the avoidance.
Nothing to add.
Okay. And then a probably helpful note for avoidance is that they say people with that attachment style should try and de-emphasize self-reliance, because I think they do heavily emphasize that, and rather emphasize mutual support. And also doing simple things like it could be a gratitude list or things like that can help dampen those deactivating strategies. So it seems like a cheesy thing, but I think for people that are avoidant, it can actually help, because it helps them focus on the positive aspects of their partner rather than the negative aspects. And that can also maybe help them realize when they're thinking of negative things that they're like, oh, okay, it's actually not going to be helpful. Yeah. You know what the next attachment style is?
Secure.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to touch on that, but...
I think while we were talking, there was a point that I put up, which says, time and again, research shows that the best predictor of happiness in a relationship is a secure attachment style. That's kind of interesting in the sense that, as I've explained, people that are secure often make things about themselves. They are able to look at a situation from the outside to say, okay, you've reacted that way, it has nothing to do with me, and try to be encouraging and supporting. And they try to, at all costs, they're always seeking the best interests of their partners. I think that's great in a sense that then it reduces any fights, that can be actually draining, release tension, I feel like, I think it's been, the whole book kind of tries to lead you into becoming a secure partner. And as I said, it's the best predictor of happiness, and I think it's important, and like I mentioned before, we should realize that your attachment style is not a death sentence. You can change that to be the best version of yourself, which, not to say that the other attachment styles are bad. Maybe there's something that we're missing of what good there is from them, but I think it's just important that daily we I think, monitor ourselves in how we react. Not just in relationships with the people around us. I think that attachment styles actually affect all sorts of relationships, not just romantic relationships.
Yeah.
And just being aware of taking stock of how you react. How you do things, and like in the book, the two used to get to that point is actually finding someone secure in your life and try to put yourself in their shoes to say how would they react if they found themselves in that situation. I think that's something we all need to be practicing, just not even like if, finding a person is too hard, just try to be the best version of yourself when you react to things. I believe, when I sum up and look at the different points that have been raised, if you generally act in the best interest of another person and just be the best version of yourself, that's essentially what a secure attachment style is. It pretty much sums up that,
I think so. I think that's a really good point, or bunch of points. And I was actually chatting to someone else in the more businessy context, and we were talking about one of the key things that one can do when they're interacting with people. So say you're on a team, or you're a manager of a team, or whatever your sort of relationship dynamic is. In that business context, one of the most important things that you can do is to have empathy for the other person, and to try and act in a way that is for their best interests. Because often what we do in various situations is we act in the interest of ourselves, and that actually normally doesn't work out well for us, even though it seems like, okay, if I act in my best interest, then generally I will get things to happen that are for my best interest. But actually, because we fundamentally, people are relational beings, and so we, in a work setting, in a relationship setting, in a friendship setting, if we can have that secure attachment style, that goes a long way. And I mean, like you sort of mentioned, those attachments, being able to express yourself clearly, being able to voice your concerns, but also doing it knowing that doing it having the other person's best interests at heart, having their well-being at top of mind, rather than your own. That's not to say you shouldn't care about yourself, of course, but it goes a long way in those relationship dynamics. And I mean, as you were saying, with those attachment styles, they don't just apply to work and general relationships, but they actually come. I think the origins of the whole attachment theory comes from childhood development, and then they realized, this actually applies well to adult attachment, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if general attachment applied as well. But I think for the secure attachment style, there was some really important things that I found, which was, one, it's having that attachment style, and you somewhat touched on this, allows one's partner to flourish, because you end up not being, or the partner ends up not being preoccupied with the relationship anymore. They are freed that mental space to be able to just be themselves, because they know that the relationship is on secure footing, and they know that when they seek intimacy, it will be reciprocated, and those kinds of things. And then another one was that in conflict situations, I think secures are really good at doing things like refraining from generalizing the issues and things like that. So they will be focused on the problem at hand, and they will be willing to engage with that problem and try and figure things out with their partner, rather than either getting hyper emotional like an anxious person might, or distancing themselves like
just an avoidant
person would. And then on top of that, they're able to effectively communicate their feelings and empathize with the person to be able to come to that resolution. And then a last thing would be that it's also really helpful to realize that if one is able to become secure, or if one is in a relationship with a secure person, then often what can happen is that secure people can make, over time, avoidance or anxious people become more secure. I think it's slightly easier to make an anxious person become more secure than an avoidant, but it's still possible. And I think that's a really helpful thing as well, so that if you were to strive to be secure in your relationships and that you can also help your partner. Be careful not to be the savior and all of those kind of things, but yeah. Cool. Okay. I think that was it for my long spiel for the attachment styles. What is another key takeaway that you had?
Another key point was most people are as needy as their unmet needs. I think there's some in the book, I just thought it's quite interesting. I think the reason I picked that out is to say that we all have needs, and that regardless of what attachment style you are.
Yeah.
And I think why I picked that was that it's all about how then you react to it. Because if you think about it, for an anxious person, their needs are closeness. Then the more they feel as though they're not close to their partner, the more naggy and needy they kind of...
the more they act out. Yeah.
Act out, and I mean, same with an avoidant. The more they feel suffocated, the more they want their own space. And again, and that's the important part, is they're being needy in a sense, but it's not viewed that way because they're needing space. But in turn, the way neediness has been presented to us, or the way we view it, maybe it's just me, you feel as if it's always that positive, I want that. But seeking distance is their need.
Yeah.
So they actually want that, but to you feel like you're being pushed away. You don't register it as them being needy, but they're actually being needy in their context.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was just an interesting fact, And I mean, later in the book, there was that story of the one couple that the guy insisted they move into the same flat, and all of a sudden he felt crowded and low, and then she decided to sublet one of her friend's flats where she would blow some steam. But after those 6 months were over, he realized no, he actually needs her, So it's the thing of, adjusting what your needs are.
Yeah.
Essentially, and I think that's also a way to kind of combat your attachment style to a more secure space, because by you analyzing that, it's like, and I think that's the one tool they use of how would a secure person react, because you then list what it is that bothers you about the partner, how do you react to it, and what's the best way you can do, etc., etc. It's the same thing with the need. It's like, I need distance, but why do I need this?
Yeah.
And then you then compare it with the secure person need distance, what do they want, and same with anxious, I need closeness, how is that interpreted by the other person, and as I said, because a lot of the book compares the anxious and avoidant attachment styles, and at the end of it, I think it has to do with communication and transparency at the end of the day. If you effectively communicate where you're at, and I think the reason these attachment styles exist is because of that struggle of effectively communicating to people around you. Because I feel the moment you make your needs known, I think the easier it is to navigate and actually can have a conversation about that. I hear you, you want my attention. And there was that example of the one guy that was a doctor, and I don't know what the lady did, but, she would constantly call, and eventually they sat down and, had a discussion about it all to the point, and they reached a compromise where he would send pre-written texts to her, and just her knowing that he's thinking of her, was able to calm her down for the rest of the day.
Yeah, because that's what they need.
That's what they need, So it just takes that bit of time to understand your partner's needs and wants, and you then adjusting them to that. And if you work together to it, then you find yourself in a more secure, position. So that is my second point. Not as long as the 3 points you discussed.
I don't think any of the other points will be. But I think it's helpful as well to realize, building on what you were saying, that when you have an unmet need and you become needy, then you act in certain ways. And then on the sort of other side of things, on the partner side of things, if you have a partner that has an unmet need and they act out in certain ways, to realize that it's not caused by you in the sense that you did something specifically wrong that caused them to either become hyper attached or either become hyper avoidant, but it is just I guess maybe I'll phrase it like this: it's their current nature. It's the way that they generally act in those kind of situations. And so if you are feeling claustrophobic, it's because of often it's because of someone who is very attached. And on the converse side, if you feel like, I have this need to be close to this person, but they keep on distancing themselves, especially for anxious people, they can often feel like it's their fault. So it's because there's something wrong with them. It's because they did something wrong, and they worry about those things naturally because they are anxious. But it's important to realize that that's not them. It's the unmet need of that person. And to try and figure out, like you were sort of using those examples, what are the compromises or creative solutions that we can come up with to not have those clashes of interest. Goes a long way. Cool. Going on to the next key point.
What's the next key point?
So for me, it was the secure base, just having a secure base and how that relates to human flourishing. So we obviously touched on it a bit as well, so we won't necessarily have to go through too much stuff here. But if someone is actually able to be a secure base for their partner, meaning that they are stable and loving towards their partner, who then is able to, at least for the most part, avoid the traps of the avoidant and the anxious person. So if you are stable, you are generally able to avoid those traps, then what that gives is it opens up space for your partner to be themselves and to pursue things that interest them, and rather than be fixated on the relationship. So it's kind of a reiteration of what I had said earlier. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's a really important key takeaway for me, is to, if you're able to be that secure base, you, as you also mentioned, you'll be happier in the relationship. And then you'll also help your partner to be happier and do the things that they're interested in, rather than sort of being anxious about stuff that hopefully in a good relationship you shouldn't need to be anxious about. Yeah. A last comment on that would be, I think it's quite fascinating to think. They mention how people with that are in, say, for example, the anxious avoidant trap, almost can't imagine a stable, loving relationship, and how much different that can be. And so I think if you are in that situation, and you desire to stay in that relationship, which that might be the right choice, it might be the wrong choice, it varies a lot from situation to situation. But even if, let's assume that it's the right choice to stay in that relationship, you should both try and work towards being secure, because how different the world will be for both of you is quite remarkable. And it doesn't have to be always that conflict and that dance of one drawing closer and one pushing away. It can actually be quite a wonderful thing if they are, both partners are able to get to that secure attachment. Be that secure base.
Cool. Yeah, no, that I know you always go back to the secure base.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's just important to feel as though that your partner has your back.
Yeah.
You don't feel threatened, by you telling them like, oh, this is what's wrong. Because I mean, like I said, avoidant people with avoidant attachment styles who belittle you every chance they get.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you're in such a relationship, then yeah, that person doesn't become your secure base. I mean, for an anxious person, having your every move questioned, the insecurities, that arise just, and again, like you say, it's them, not you, and not having to deal with that, and as you said, not having to do that to make you end up in a much happier situation, and by so doing, you have to strive for that secure attachment from both ends, in that relationship. Then, yes, I don't see why not people should work on themselves to get to that point. As it says, it predicts happiness in a relationship, and I think at the end of the day, I think that's what everyone generally wants when they find someone, be happy with them and live forever after.
I think I can agree with it. Yeah. Generally, people are looking to be miserable.
But yeah, so like my last point, is one of the blocks. It's about finding the right partner the secure way. I think just like, how I led into that is like we all want, to be in a happy relationship, and, just, on that, there's a few points, that are listed, under that section, it's like, very early, on treating, identifying those deal breakers, do not make excuses when something comes up. If something you don't agree with, move on. You do not have to fix everything. Some things can be left alone. It's not your problem to do it. Not saying that it's someone else's problem to do it. They just have to deal with it and, better themselves, effectively communicating your needs, from day one. Again, like I mentioned before, most people as needy as unmet needs. So if you meet someone, you straight up tell them,
these are my needs. Yeah.
Like you either come to the party or not, also with reason, finding a compromise. But you kind of, if you effectively communicate them, then you find a workaround. Need be known that down the line, something is not met. You're like, but then there is a good enough reason for why that's the case. So yeah, like never taking blame. When someone does something offensive, I feel like that's very important because, like I've said, I think I've said it a few times, that in some cases it's never about you. They're probably dealing with something, they react a certain way. You need to, at all means, try to take yourself out. Look at the situation from the outside and be like, what has my role been to this? If you then identify that you did not contribute much to ending up in that situation, then take yourself out of that situation and say, like, listen, you acted this way. I don't think it has anything to do with me. Either explain why you are reacting the same in that way, or move on from it. So and the last one is the whole expecting to be treated with respect, dignity, and love. I feel like that's very important. Even these days, generally when I meet people, someone I might have an interest in, the one thing I say, just treat me kindly. If you're not kind to me, like, then there's no need. Like, why should I, go through a battlefield for no reason? I love my peace. You need to be treated with respect. If someone doesn't respect you from day one, either that will never change, or you don't need to live through that.
Yeah, that's very good. Because I think often people get, and I think it seems, if I'm understanding the book correctly, that often it's anxious people that are they really want to get into relationships. I mean, all of the different styles, interestingly enough, want to get into relationships, even the avoidant ones, but especially the anxious ones, they want to get into a relationship, and they will seemingly try to do that despite and overlook those faults, rather than I guess objectively trying to say, hey, like, this person actually isn't being kind to me. The fact that they aren't ever calling me, and they just abandon me after the first date or something like that, but then call a week later. It's like, that's an important sign to take note of, and it's not like you doing something wrong. It's actually that person is not acting in a secure way, and if that's how the relationship is starting out, it's probably not a good idea. So that's a good point.
That was my last and final point.
Cool. So my last one was effective communication. So it's kind of one of the things that was touched on there, and I just think it's vital. Like, it just is vital. If you are any of those attachment styles, even if you're secure, I mean, part of being secure is effectively communicating. But if you were secure in all the other ways, but you weren't an effective communicator, I think you would still struggle, and it just wouldn't work. But given effective communication, I think you can resolve a lot of things. You can understand things without guessing. You can acknowledge your needs and clearly understand them, and have your partner clearly understand them. so that it's not strange when those needs aren't met and that's raised. But hopefully, if you are communicating well and clearly, you're able to both have your needs met and meet your partner's needs, because you're able to try and understand them well and things like that. But without that effective communication, then arguments become wars and all kinds of things like that. Whereas with effective communication, arguments can actually be something where people grow closer together because they learn about each other. And it's quite a dramatic difference that can have, and it kind of plays back to the dramatic difference of anxious, avoidant, trap type relationships versus secure type relationships, and how those worlds can be completely different, because in those little interactions, that effective communication or that breakdown of communication can affect the rest of the day, the rest of the week, year, life. So I think key is effective communication. Cool. And do you have some concluding thoughts?
Everyone should read the book.
Yeah.
That's I just feel one should take the time to just sort of understand what the attachment style is, and also like be able to identify other people's attachment style, especially, if you want to get into a relationship with them, I would highly recommend the book. It's got some very good God nuggets along the way, so I just feel it would be, instead of being in this world where people are just out here hating each other, I think maybe that could be reduced a bit,
That's true.
Yeah, that's my concluding thoughts. So.
Yeah, that's very true. No, I think if you are looking for like understanding yourself better, which I don't know why, like you said earlier, I don't know why you wouldn't, then highly recommend the book. There's a lot of, I think, probably helpful books and a lot of unhelpful books. I think this is definitely one of the helpful ones. And some of my concluding thoughts are basically we are wired for connection to others. So, and not just general connection, but intimate connection. We want intimate connection, and we thrive on that as human beings. And it can be in the form of family, friends, romantic relationships. But as the authors say, we rely on others for our emotional well-being. Often we think that we're self-reliant and all of that, and we think that we can sort of face the world on our own. And I think even they touch on quite often, just sort of random little sort of side notes that they make, is that in our current society, the individual and being self-reliant is very sort of highly praised, but it's actually a very dangerous thing to think you truly can be fully self-reliant. I think it's this book, I might be wrong, but they give the example of the Into the Wild guy who he thinks, he's going to go out into the woods and live a life and things like that, and he thinks he's going to be fine, and but then it turns out that he actually, once he was there for a couple months, I think he was like, no, he wants to return.
In his bad moments, he had something about happiness together or something.
Yes. He was saying, so he wanted to return, and he couldn't return because I think the lake that was frozen when he walked across had now opened up, and the water was too strong to cross. So he went back, and then he died there. And then, like you say, they found, I think, his notebook, and in it was, one of his last entries was something like, happiness is, I can't know, I'm paraphrasing, but happiness is pointless without being able to share it with others. So I think we rely heavily on our emotional well-being. We rely on others for that, and to not be ashamed of that. That's fine. It's human to do that. And then for those who want to actually be in a relationship, which is most people, they shouldn't feel like they are weak for having that nagging feeling to be in a relationship and have that desire for a partner, because it's a natural human inclination. But caution comes with that inclination, because as powerful as that desire is, equally as powerful are the emotions in a relationship. And if we're not aware of our attachment styles and the general constructive and destructive tendencies that we have in those relationships, then often the relationships can become a massive source of agony, and they could actually be a source of joy. But given understanding and time and effort, they can be that joy. But we need to reshape the patterns that we naturally fall into to try and be more secure. And if you happen to be one of those secure people, then you can thank a world of colliding factors that you are that.
And hope to stay there, because, you can regress.
Exactly, yeah. But even those secure people, like you say, they need to try and understand themselves so that they can continue being secure. But I wouldn't be surprised if most of the time the reason that people are secure is because they reflect on how they interact with others and things like that. And then, no, go for it.
No, just but it did mention, you can't be secure up until you then have that terrible breakup,
yes.
And then things change a bit. So, as much as it's from self-reflection, what if you have generally been that secure person because of just how you've lived through life or gone through life, just be wary of those moments, those moments that can take you somewhere where you shouldn't be,
the secure can fall, and the anxious and avoidance, they can learn to be more secure. And I think it's vital to realize that that we need to try and aim to be secure in relationships, but it's a constant ongoing thing. It's and going with that effective communication, and being the secure base, and looking at all of those different sort of ways of interacting with people, and trying to, as I think your last point was, trying to say, how can I be more secure? What are the ways? And even if you're secure or anxious or avoidant, all of us should try and be more secure. Yeah. Cool.
Thanks, James.
Thanks very much, Peter. We'll chat again in a month.
Yeah, definitely. Cool.